The morning bell rang at 5:30, just like it had every single day for the past 47 years. Sister Margaret opened her eyes slowly, her joints protesting as she sat up in the narrow bed that had been her resting place for nearly half a century. At 73, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to listen to her body's whispered warnings. Her small room was simple, almost bare. A wooden cross hung on the white wall above her bed, and a single window looked out onto the convent garden where she spent many peaceful hours tending to vegetables and flowers. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she reached for her gray habit, the same style of dress she had worn since she was 26 years old. Back then, her hands had been smooth and quick. Now they were marked with age spots and moved more slowly, but they were still strong from years of kneading bread, scrubbing floors, and caring for others. Sister Margaret had come to St. Catherine's Convent when she was young and full of dreams that seemed impossible to reach. She had grown up in a small town where her family struggled to make ends meet. Her father worked at the local factory, and her mother took in laundry to help pay the bills. Despite their financial struggles, they had managed to save enough money for piano lessons. When Margaret showed an unusual talent for music as a child, every Tuesday and Thursday, young Margaret would walk 3 miles to Mrs. Peterson's house for her piano lessons. Mrs. Peterson was a retired music teacher who charged very little but demanded everything from her students. Margaret's fingers would dance across the keys with a natural grace that amazed everyone who heard her play. She could pick up melodies by ear and play them back perfectly after hearing them just once. By the time she was 16, Margaret was performing at local church services and community events. People would drive from neighboring towns just to hear the young girl play. Her music teacher began talking about scholarships to music school, about a future where Margaret could study at prestigious conservatories and perhaps even perform in concert halls. The dreams felt both thrilling and terrifying to a girl from such humble beginnings, but life had other plans. When Margaret was 18, her father was injured in an accident at the factory. The family's small income disappeared almost overnight, and medical bills began piling up. Margaret watched her parents worry late into the night, counting and recounting the few dollars they had left. The piano lessons stopped first, then talks of music school faded away like morning mist. Margaret took a job at the local diner, serving coffee and pie to help support her family. Her hands, which had once moved gracefully across piano keys, now carried heavy trays and washed countless dishes. But even during those difficult times, music never truly left her. She would hum while she worked, and sometimes late at night. She would tap out melodies on the kitchen table when no one was watching. It was during this challenging period that Margaret began attending daily mass at the local Catholic church. The peace she found there, the sense of purpose and community, slowly began to fill the empty space that music had left behind. She started volunteering, helping with church events and visiting elderly parishioners. The priest, Father O'Brien, noticed her dedication and gentle spirit. One evening, after months of prayer and reflection, Margaret made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She announced that she felt called to religious life. Her parents were shocked, her friends couldn't understand, and her former piano teacher pleaded with her to reconsider. But Margaret felt a deep certainty that this was her path. She had found a different kind of music in service to others, a different kind of performance in daily acts of love and kindness. At 26, Margaret entered St. Catherine's Convent as a postulant, beginning her journey toward becoming a nun. The transition wasn't easy. She missed her family terribly, and there were nights when she questioned her decision. The silence of convent life felt overwhelming after growing up in a house full of chatter and laughter. But gradually she found her place among the sisters. The convent had an old upright piano in the community room, a donation from a local family many years earlier. When Margaret first saw it, her heart skipped a beat. The wood was dark and polished, and though it showed signs of age, it still held the promise of beautiful music. But she quickly learned that the piano was rarely used. Most of the sisters had no musical training, and the few who could play simple hymns were usually too busy with other duties. Margaret never mentioned her musical background to the other sisters. It seemed like bragging, and more importantly, it felt like dwelling on a past life that she had willingly left behind. When asked about her life before the convent, she would simply say she had worked in a diner and helped care for her family. The truth about her musical gifts remained her secret. Years passed, and Margaret threw herself into convent life with the same dedication she had once given to music. She worked in the kitchen, learning to cook for 30 sisters with limited resources but unlimited creativity. She tended the garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the earth with patient care. She took her turn cleaning the chapel, polishing the wooden pews until they gleamed, and arranging fresh flowers from the garden on the altar. The other sisters came to depend on Margaret's quiet competence and gentle humor. She had a way of making even the most tedious chores feel meaningful. When Sister Agnes struggled with arthritis, Margaret would quietly take on extra duties without being asked. When young Sister Clare felt homesick during her first year, Margaret would sit with her in the garden, sharing stories that made her laugh. But sometimes, usually late at night when the convent was silent, Margaret would find herself standing in the doorway of the community room, looking at the piano. Her fingers would unconsciously move as if they were touching keys, playing melodies that existed only in her memory. She never approached the instrument, never lifted the lid to expose the keys beneath. That part of her life was over, she told herself. She had chosen a different path, and she was content with that choice, or so she believed. The truth was more complicated. Music lived inside Margaret like a sleeping giant, quiet most of the time, but never truly gone. When she heard hymns during Mass, her mind would automatically add harmonies and variations. When she worked in the garden, she would find herself humming complex pieces she had learned decades ago. Her hands, even while kneading bread or folding laundry, would sometimes move in the patterns of scales and arpeggios. The years continued to pass. Margaret celebrated her silver jubilee, marking 25 years of religious life, then 30, then 40. She watched young postulants arrive full of enthusiasm and uncertainty, just as she had been. She comforted sisters as they aged and eventually said goodbye to those who passed away. Through it all, the piano remained in the corner of the community room, a silent witness to countless meals, meetings, and moments of fellowship. Margaret's hair, what little showed beneath her veil, had turned completely white. Her hands, once so quick and sure on the keys, had developed the slight tremor that comes with age. She moved more slowly now, taking care on the stairs and resting more often during her work. But her spirit remained strong, and her dedication to her sisters and her faith never wavered. She had made peace with her choices, or so she thought. The music that once filled her dreams had been replaced by the rhythm of prayer, the melody of service, and the harmony of community life. She was, by all appearances, a woman completely satisfied with the path she had chosen. But deep inside, in a place she rarely examined, the musician she had once been waited patiently, like a song written but never sung, ready to emerge when the right moment finally arrived. The day that would change everything started like any other Tuesday morning at St. Catherine's Convent. Sister Margaret was in the kitchen before dawn, as usual, preparing breakfast for her 30 fellow sisters. The familiar routine of measuring oats for porridge and slicing bread brought her comfort. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, the same hands that had once danced across piano keys, but now found their purpose in feeding others. As she stirred the large pot of porridge, she hummed softly under her breath. It was an old habit she'd never quite shaken, one that the other sisters had grown accustomed to over the decades. This morning, the melody that escaped her lips was Bach's Jesu, joy of man's desiring, though she didn't consciously choose it. The music simply flowed from her like breathing. After breakfast and morning prayers, Mother Superior made an announcement that caught everyone's attention. The convent would be hosting a small charity event the following Saturday. Local families who had been struggling financially would be invited for a warm meal and some community fellowship. It was the kind of outreach work that made Sister Margaret's heart sing, even more than the melody she'd been humming earlier. "We'll need volunteers to help serve the meal and organize activities for the children," Mother Superior explained to the gathered sisters. Sister Margaret, I know I can count on you to coordinate the kitchen preparations." Sister Margaret nodded eagerly. She loved these events because they reminded her why she'd chosen this life of service. Seeing the gratitude in a hungry child's eyes or the relief on a worried parent's face made all the quiet sacrifices worthwhile. The week flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Sister Margaret worked tirelessly, planning menus that would stretch their modest budget to feed as many people as possible. She organized the other sisters, coordinated with local donors, and even convinced the baker in town to donate day-old bread that was still perfectly good. Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright. The convent's main hall had been transformed, with tables covered in simple white cloths and small vases of flowers from the garden. The smell of Sister Margaret's hearty vegetable soup filled the air, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread and apple pie made from fruit they'd grown themselves. As the families began arriving, Sister Margaret felt the familiar joy that came from serving others. She watched from the kitchen doorway as children ran around the hall, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Parents who had been carrying heavy burdens all week relaxed for a moment, sharing conversations with neighbors and enjoying a meal they didn't have to worry about paying for. But it was when the volunteer arrived that Sister Margaret's world shifted in a way she hadn't expected. The young woman couldn't have been more than 22, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. She had volunteered through the local community center to help provide entertainment for the children. As she introduced herself to Mother Superior, Sister Margaret learned that she was a music student at the nearby college. "I thought maybe I could play some simple songs for the children," the volunteer explained, glancing toward the old, upright piano that sat in the corner of the room. "I brought some sheet music for nursery rhymes and hymns they might know." Sister Margaret's heart stopped for just a moment. In all her years at the convent, she had rarely seen anyone approach that piano with the intention of actually playing it. She found herself drawn from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron as she moved closer to watch. The volunteer sat down at the piano bench and lifted the lid, revealing the yellowed keys that Sister Margaret knew so well from her late night glances. The young woman's fingers found their positions, and she began to play "Jesus Loves Me," a simple children's hymn that should have been easy for any music student. But something was wrong. The volunteer was clearly nervous, and her playing showed it. She stumbled over notes that should have been simple, paused awkwardly between phrases, and played with a mechanical stiffness that made the beautiful hymn sound choppy and uncertain. Sister Margaret could see the frustration building in the young woman's face as children gathered around the piano, their excited chatter drowning out the hesitant music. From her position near the kitchen door, Sister Margaret felt something stirring inside her chest. Her fingers, still damp from washing dishes, began moving unconsciously at her sides. Without realizing it, she was playing along with the struggling volunteer, her muscle memory filling in the correct notes, adding the gentle harmonies that would make the simple song soar. The volunteer tried again, this time attempting "Amazing Grace." Sister Margaret's heart ached as she watched the young woman's fingers search for the right keys, missing the emotional depth that could make the beloved hymn touch people's souls. In her mind, Sister Margaret could hear how the song should sound, could feel the way her own fingers would shape each phrase to bring out its meaning. As she stood there, listening to the hesitant music, something happened that Sister Margaret hadn't experienced in decades. Her hands were no longer just unconsciously moving along with the melody, they were practically burning with the need to touch those keys herself. The desire was so strong it was almost physical pain. She remembered suddenly, with startling clarity, the last time she had played piano. It had been the night before she entered the convent 47 years ago. She had gone to her childhood church and asked Father O'Brien if she could play one last time. She had chosen "Amazing Grace," then too, playing it with all the skill and emotion she possessed, as a kind of farewell to the musical life she was leaving behind. Now, hearing the same hymn played so tentatively, she felt as though her younger self was calling to her across the decades. The volunteer finished her short performance to polite applause from the families. But Sister Margaret could see that the young woman knew she hadn't done well. She looked embarrassed and disappointed. quickly closing the piano lid and moving away to help serve dessert. As the afternoon continued, Sister Margaret found herself distracted in a way that was completely unlike her. She served soup and sliced pie and chatted with the families, but part of her mind remained focused on that piano. Every time she passed by it, her eyes would linger on the closed lid, and her fingers would twitch with remembered knowledge. That evening, after the last family had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, Sister Margaret sat in her small room staring out at the garden. The events of the day had awakened something in her that she thought had been safely buried. The music that had been sleeping in her heart for 47 years was stirring, stretching, demanding attention. She tried to pray, to focus her mind on spiritual matters as she always did before sleep. But instead of peaceful thoughts about her service to God and her sisters, her mind was filled with melodies. She could hear Bach and Chopin, Mozart and Beethoven, all the composers she had once loved so deeply. More than that, she could feel her fingers remembering how to bring their music to life. Unable to sleep, Sister Margaret rose from her bed and moved quietly through the dark corridors of the convent. She told herself she was just going to the kitchen for a glass of water, but her feet carried her instead to the community room where the piano waited in the shadows. The room was dark, except for moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Sister Margaret approached the piano slowly, as if it were a wild animal that might bolt if she moved too quickly. She stood beside it for several minutes, her hand resting on the smooth wood of the lid. Then, almost without conscious decision, she lifted the lid. The keys gleamed pale in the moonlight, ivory and ebony arranged in the familiar pattern that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Her hands trembled as she raised them over the keyboard. For a moment she hesitated. This felt like crossing a line she had drawn 47 years ago, like opening a door she had deliberately closed, but the pull was too strong. Gently, barely breathing, Sister Margaret allowed her fingers to touch the keys. She pressed down on middle C so softly that it barely made a sound. Then D, then E, a simple scale that sent electricity through her entire body. The muscle memory was still there, sleeping but not dead. Her fingers remembered where to go, how to curve, how to find the keys without looking. Emboldened, she played a simple chord, then another. The sound filled the quiet room like a prayer. Without fully realizing what she was doing, Sister Margaret began to play Ave Maria. The melody flowed from her fingers as if 47 years hadn't passed, as if she had been practicing every day instead of kneading bread and tending gardens. The beautiful, haunting notes filled the silence of the convent with a richness and depth that the old piano hadn't produced in decades. As she played, tears began streaming down Sister Margaret's face. They were tears of joy and sorrow mixed together, tears for the music she had given up and the music that had never truly left her. In that moment, she realized that she had been living only part of her life, that there was a piece of her soul she had locked away and forgotten. When the last note faded into silence, Sister Margaret sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys. The awakening was complete. The musician who had been sleeping inside the nun was finally fully awake. The morning after Sister Margaret's midnight encounter with the piano, she woke feeling like a completely different person. For the first time in decades, she had dreamed about music. Not the gentle humming that usually filled her daily routine, but real music, complex pieces flowing through her mind with startling clarity. She could still hear the echo of Ave Maria from the night before, and her fingers tingled with the memory of touching those keys again. As she went through her morning routine, Sister Margaret tried to convince herself that the previous night had been a moment of weakness, a brief lapse in the disciplined life she had built over 47 years. She told herself to focus on her duties, to push the music back into the quiet corner of her heart where it belonged. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if someone had lit a candle in a room that had been dark for decades, and now she couldn't stop seeing everything in this new light. During breakfast preparation, she found herself humming more complex melodies than usual. Sister Catherine, who worked alongside her in the kitchen, noticed the change immediately. "You seem different this morning," Sister Catherine observed, pausing in her task of setting out plates for the community breakfast. "More lively somehow." Sister Margaret felt her cheeks warm. Just grateful for another day to serve, she replied. But even she could hear that her voice carried a new energy. The morning proceeded normally until Mother Superior approached her after prayers with an unexpected announcement. Sister Margaret, I have some news from town that might interest you. The community center is organizing their annual talent showcase next month. It's always such a wonderful event for bringing the whole area together. Sister Margaret's heart jumped, though she wasn't sure why. Talent showcases had never particularly interested her before, Mother Superior continued. They're looking for volunteers to help with serving refreshments and organizing the backstage area. I thought you might enjoy contributing to such a positive community event. Of course, Mother Superior, Sister Margaret replied automatically. I'd be happy to help however I can. But as Mother Superior walked away, Sister Margaret realized that wasn't what her heart was saying at all. Something deeper was stirring, something that had nothing to do with serving refreshments or organizing backstage areas. The word talent kept echoing in her mind, bringing with it a flood of memories from her youth when she had performed at community events just like this one. Over the next few days, Sister Margaret found herself thinking about the talent showcase constantly. She tried to focus on her regular duties, but her mind kept wandering to possibilities she knew she shouldn't be considering. What would it feel like to sit at a piano in front of an audience again? Could her fingers still handle complex pieces after so many years? Did she even remember enough music to perform? The questions tormented her during the day and kept her awake at night. She found herself making excuses to walk past the community room where the piano sat, always closed, always waiting. Each time she passed it, the pull grew stronger. On Thursday morning, while she was hanging laundry in the garden, Sister Margaret overheard two of the younger sisters talking about the talent showcase. I heard there's going to be singing, dancing, even some poetry reading, Sister Anne was saying as she pinned a sheet to the clothesline. The whole community gets involved. Families come from 3 towns over. It sounds wonderful, Sister Claire replied. I wish I had some kind of talent to share. It must feel amazing to have a gift that can bring joy to so many people. Sister. Margaret's hand stilled on the wet cloth she was holding. A gift that can bring joy to so many people. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had spent her entire adult life finding ways to serve others, to bring comfort and help to those who needed it. But she had never considered that her music might be a form of service too. That afternoon, while the other sisters were resting, Sister Margaret found herself standing outside Mother Superior's office. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard through the heavy wooden door. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was here, all her carefully planned words seemed to disappear. She knocked softly. "Come in," Mother Superior's familiar voice called. Sister Margaret entered the office, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles were white. Mother Superior looked up from the papers she was reviewing, her kind but serious eyes taking in Sister Margaret's obvious nervousness. "What can I do for you, Sister Margaret?" "You look troubled." Sister Margaret took a deep breath, trying to find courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "Mother Superior, I wanted to talk to you about the talent showcase at the community center." "Oh, yes, have you decided which areas you'd like to volunteer in? I'm sure they could use help in the kitchen." "Actually," Sister Margaret interrupted, then immediately apologized for her boldness. "I'm sorry, Mother Superior. What I meant to say is, I was wondering if it might be possible for me to participate in the showcase itself." Mother Superior's eyebrows rose in surprise. In all the years she had known Sister Margaret, she had never known her to seek any kind of attention or recognition. "Participate? How, Sister Margaret? Do you have some talent I'm not aware of?" This was the moment Sister Margaret had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Taking another deep breath, she said, "I can play piano, Mother Superior. I used to play. When I was young, before I entered the convent, I thought perhaps I could play a hymn or two, something that might bring comfort to the families who attend." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Mother Superior set down her pen and studied Sister Margaret's face carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Sister Margaret, I had no idea you had musical training. That's quite a surprise after all these years. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I'm concerned about this request. We have lived a life of humility and service here. Performing in public, especially at your age and after so many years away from music, seems inappropriate somehow. Sister Margaret felt her heart sinking, but she pressed on. I understand your concerns, Mother Superior, but I thought that perhaps sharing music could be another form of service. The showcase is for charity, to help the homeless shelter. Maybe my music could help raise more funds, bring more people together for a good cause. Mother Superior's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Sister Margaret, I can see that this means something to you, and I appreciate your desire to help. But we must consider what's appropriate for someone in our position. You're 73 years old, and you haven't played piano in decades? What if you make mistakes? What if you embarrass yourself, or worse, embarrass the convent? Each word felt like a small knife to Sister Margaret's heart, but she knew Mother Superior was speaking from a place of care and concern, not cruelty. Furthermore, Mother Superior continued, we have responsibilities here that must come first. Your duties in the kitchen, your work with the younger sisters, your commitment to our daily prayers and community life, these are your calling now. We cannot let pride or nostalgia distract us from the path we have chosen. Sister Margaret nodded, understanding the wisdom in Mother Superior's words even as they crushed the hope that had been growing in her heart. You're right, of course. I apologize for even suggesting such a thing. I don't know what came over me. There's nothing to apologize for, Mother Superior said kindly. It's natural to remember our past lives sometimes, especially as we age. But we must remember that we left those lives behind for a reason. Our calling is here, in service to God and to each other. As Sister Margaret left the office, she felt deflated and confused. She had expected the rejection, but actually hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hurt more than she had anticipated. She walked slowly back to the kitchen, where she began preparing vegetables for dinner with mechanical precision, but even as she accepted Mother Superior's decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had awakened inside her. The music that had been sleeping for 47 years was now fully awake, and it seemed impossible to put it back to sleep. That evening, during communal recreation time, Sister Margaret sat with her fellow sisters in the community room, trying to focus on the quiet conversations and simple activities that usually brought her peace. But her eyes kept drifting to the piano in the corner, and her fingers kept moving unconsciously in her lap. Sister Catherine noticed her distraction. Is everything all right, Sister Margaret? You seem far away tonight? Just thinking about the talent showcase, Sister Margaret replied honestly. It sounds like it will be a wonderful event for the community. Oh, yes, agreed Sister Ruth, an elderly sister who had been at the convent even longer than Sister Margaret. I remember going to events like that when I was a child. There was always someone who could play piano beautifully. Music has such power to bring people together, doesn't it? Sister Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. Yes, she whispered. It really does. As the evening progressed and the sisters began heading to their rooms for private prayer before sleep, Sister Margaret lingered in the community room. The nights became Sister Margaret's secret sanctuary. 3 days after Mother Superior's gentle but firm rejection, she found herself unable to sleep. The music that had awakened inside her refused to be quiet, playing constantly in her mind, like a radio that couldn't be turned off. Melodies she hadn't thought about in decades would suddenly appear in her consciousness, complete with every note, every harmony, every delicate touch that would bring them to life. At first, she tried to resist. She would lie in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, forcing herself to recite prayers or plan the next day's meals. But the music was stronger than her willpower. Finally, on that third sleepless night, she gave in to what felt like an unstoppable force. Sister Margaret rose from her bed at 3 a.m, when the convent was deep in sleep. She moved through the dark corridors like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors. She knew every creak of every floorboard, every door that might squeak if opened too quickly. After 47 years in this building, she could navigate it blindfolded. The community room was bathed in silver moonlight when she entered. The piano waited in its corner, exactly as it had been since her last forbidden visit. But this time, Sister Margaret didn't hesitate. She went straight to the bench, lifted the lid with practiced quiet, and placed her hands on the keys. She started with something simple, a basic scale that would help her remember how her fingers should move. The sound was so soft it was barely a whisper, but to Sister Margaret it might as well have been a full orchestra. Each note sent electricity through her entire body, awakening muscles and memories that had been dormant for decades. Then she tried a simple hymn, "How Great Thou Art," playing it so quietly that someone standing outside the room wouldn't have heard it. But the gentleness of her touch didn't diminish the emotion she poured into every note. Tears streamed down her face as she played, tears of joy and sadness mixed together, in a way that only music could create. That first secret session lasted only 15 minutes. Sister Margaret was too nervous, too afraid of being caught, to stay longer, but as she crept back to her room, she felt more alive than she had in years. The music had awakened something in her soul that she had forgotten existed. The next night she stayed a little longer. And the night after that, longer still. Within a week, Sister Margaret had established a routine that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Every night after the convent had settled into deep sleep, she would make her silent journey to the community room. She began to remember pieces she thought she had forgotten completely. Her fingers, though older and stiffer than they had once been, gradually began to regain their flexibility and strength. She started with simple pieces, hymns and folk songs that didn't require too much technical skill. But as her confidence grew, so did her ambition. One night she attempted Chopin's Minute Waltz, playing it so slowly and carefully that it took nearly 5 minutes instead of 1. The melody flowed from her fingers like water, each note perfectly placed, despite the decades that had passed since she last played it. Another night, she tackled Bach's Prelude in C major, a piece she had learned as a teenager. The mathematical precision of Bach's composition seemed to unlock something in her muscle memory, and soon she was playing with a fluidity that amazed her. It was as if her hands remembered not just the notes but the very essence of how each composer should sound. The most magical night came 2 weeks into her secret practice routine. Sister Margaret had been working on Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano. The gentle, flowing melody seemed perfect for her careful, quiet playing style. As she played the haunting opening notes, she lost herself completely in the music. For those few minutes, she wasn't a 73-year-old nun in a convent. She was every age she had ever been when music was part of her life. She was 16, playing for her church congregation and feeling their amazement at her talent. She was 18, dreaming of conservatories and concert halls. She was 25, saying goodbye to music forever on her last night as a secular woman. The piece built to its emotional climax, and Sister Margaret found herself playing with more volume and intensity than she had risked before. The notes filled the community room with their ethereal beauty, and for a moment she forgot where she was entirely. It was only when she reached the final, dying notes of the piece that reality came crashing back. She had been playing too loudly. Much too loudly. Sister Margaret's hands froze above the keys, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard throughout the building. She listened intently for any sound of movement, any indication that she had woken someone. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, convinced that she had escaped detection, Sister Margaret closed the piano lid and hurried back to her room. But the fear of being caught had been replaced by something even stronger, the absolute certainty that she couldn't stop. Music had reclaimed its place in her life, and no amount of guilt or fear could make her give it up again. Her secret sessions became longer and more daring. She began practicing pieces that required real technical skill, Rachmaninoff's haunting melodies, Mozart's precise elegance, even some of the simpler Liszt pieces that had once been her favorites. Her fingers, though no longer young, proved remarkably adaptable. The muscle memory was still there, waiting to be awakened. But with increased skill came increased volume. Sister Margaret found it nearly impossible to play emotional pieces quietly. Music demanded expression, demanded the full range of dynamics that made it meaningful. She began taking greater risks, playing with more intensity, letting herself get lost in the beauty of the sound. During the day, she tried to act normally, but the other sisters began to notice changes in her behavior. Sister Catherine commented on how energetic she seemed despite the dark circles under her eyes. Sister Ruth mentioned that she had been humming more complex melodies than usual while she worked. Even Mother Superior gave her a few searching looks, as if trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite identify. "You seem different lately, Sister Margaret," Mother Superior said one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "More restless." "Perhaps." Sister Margaret's heart jumped, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Just feeling grateful for all of God's blessings, Mother Superior. Sometimes gratitude makes one feel more alive." It wasn't entirely a lie. She was grateful. Grateful for the rediscovery of a part of herself she thought was lost forever. But she was also living with the constant stress of maintaining her secret, and it was beginning to show. The dangerous game continued for 3 weeks. Sister Margaret's playing improved dramatically, her repertoire expanded, and her joy in the music grew stronger each night. She began to fantasize about actually performing again, imagining herself at that talent showcase, sharing her gift with an audience who would understand and appreciate what she was doing, but she also knew she was walking a tightrope. Each night brought the risk of discovery, and she could see that her daytime behavior was becoming harder to explain. The other sisters were beginning to ask more questions, and Mother Superior's concerned glances were becoming more frequent. The secret was becoming too big to contain, and Sister Margaret found herself caught between two impossible choices: give up the music that had become as necessary to her as breathing, or find a way to continue that wouldn't eventually expose her forbidden activities. As she lay in bed each morning after her secret practice sessions, exhausted but exhilarated, Sister Margaret knew that something would have to change soon. She couldn't maintain this double life indefinitely. The music inside her had grown too strong, too demanding, to be contained by stolen moments in the dark, but she also knew that she would rather face whatever consequences might come than give up her music again. For the first time in 47 years, she felt completely alive, completely herself. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it rather than return to the silent life she had been living. The awakening was complete, and there could be no going back to sleep. The morning that would change everything forever started with Sister Margaret feeling more confident than she had in weeks. Her secret practice sessions had been going so well that she was beginning to think she might never be caught. She had memorized the exact timing of the night watch, knew which floors creaked and which doors made noise, and had perfected the art of playing beautifully while keeping the volume just low enough to avoid detection. On this particular Wednesday morning, Sister Margaret had spent nearly 2 hours at the piano, working on what might have been her most ambitious piece yet, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was an incredibly complex piece, full of sweeping emotions and technical challenges that would test even a professional pianist. But something about the haunting melody spoke to her soul in a way that made the difficulty irrelevant. She had been so absorbed in the music, so lost in the intricate passages and soaring melodies, that she had stayed longer than usual. The sky outside the community room windows was already showing the first pale hints of dawn when she finally closed the piano lid and prepared to return to her room. Sister Margaret was exhausted but exhilarated as she crept through the corridors. Her fingers still tingled from the complex chord progressions, and her heart was full of the satisfaction that comes from mastering something truly challenging. She was so caught up in replaying the music in her mind that she didn't notice she wasn't alone until it was too late. "Sister Margaret?" The soft voice cut through the early morning silence like a knife. Sister Margaret froze in the middle of the hallway, her heart stopping completely for what felt like several seconds, before beginning to beat so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. Sister Agnes stood in the doorway of the community room, her young face filled with confusion and something that looked like wonder. At only 28 years old, Sister Agnes was one of the newer members of their community, having taken her final vows just 3 years earlier. She was known for being an early riser, often getting up before the morning bell to spend extra time in prayer. Sister Agnes, Sister Margaret managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing awake so early?" "I couldn't sleep," Sister Agnes replied, stepping fully into the hallway. "I came to the community room to pray, and I heard—" "Sister Margaret, was that you playing the piano?" There was no point in lying. Sister Agnes had clearly heard enough to know exactly what had been happening. Sister Margaret felt all the energy drain from her body as the weeks of secret joy came crashing down around her. "Yes," she said simply, her voice filled with defeat, "it was me." Sister Agnes moved closer, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement. "Sister Margaret, I had no idea you could play like that. That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard. How long has this been going on?" "A few weeks," Sister Margaret admitted, unable to meet the younger woman's eyes. "I know I shouldn't have been doing it. I know it was wrong." "Wrong?" Sister Agnes repeated, genuinely puzzled. "Sister Margaret, what you were playing was absolutely incredible. I've never heard anything so moving, so holy almost." "How is that wrong?" Sister Margaret looked up, surprised by the response. She had expected immediate condemnation, perhaps even anger at being deceived. Instead, Sister Agnes looked genuinely curious and even impressed. "Because I was told not to," Sister Margaret explained. "Mother Superior made it clear that performing music wasn't appropriate for someone in my position. And I've been sneaking around, lying by omission, breaking the trust of our community." Sister Agnes was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with what she had discovered. "What will you do now?" she asked finally. "I suppose I'll have to stop," Sister Margaret said, though even speaking the words felt like tearing her heart in half. "And I'll have to tell Mother Superior what I've been doing." "But why?" Sister Agnes asked, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. "Sister Margaret, if you could have heard what I heard, the way you played that piece, it was like listening to angels. How can something so beautiful be wrong?" Sister Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. The kindness in Sister Agnes's voice was almost harder to bear than anger would have been. "Because I made a commitment when I entered this life. I gave up my old ways, my old pursuits. Music was part of the world I left behind." "But you didn't really leave it behind, did you?" Sister Agnes observed gently. "It's still part of you. I've noticed how you hum while you work, how your face lights up during the musical parts of our services. Music isn't something separate from your faith, Sister Margaret. It seems like it's part of how you express it." Before Sister Margaret could respond, they both heard footsteps echoing from another part of the building. The morning bell would ring soon, and other sisters would be waking up. Their private conversation was about to become much more complicated. "We should talk more about this later," Sister Agnes whispered urgently. "But Sister Margaret, please, don't do anything hasty. What you have is a gift, and I don't think gifts like that are meant to be buried." Throughout the morning routine, prayers, breakfast, work assignments, Sister Margaret felt like she was moving through a dream. Every time she looked at Sister Agnes, she expected to see judgment or disappointment, but instead she saw only sympathy and what looked like determination. It was confusing and comforting at the same time, but Sister Agnes's kind response turned out to be the exception rather than the rule. By evening, word had somehow spread through the small community. Sister Margaret never found out exactly how it happened, whether Sister Agnes had told someone in confidence, or whether other sisters had noticed the unusual early morning conversation and put pieces together. But by dinner time, she could feel the weight of disapproving glances and hushed conversations after evening prayers. Mother Superior approached her with an expression that was both sad and stern. "Sister Margaret, I think we need to have a conversation. Please come to my office." The walk to Mother Superior's office felt like the longest journey of Sister Margaret's life. With each step, she felt the weight of 47 years of trust and respect slipping away. She had built a reputation as one of the most reliable, humble, and dedicated sisters in the community. Now, all of that seemed to be crumbling because she couldn't resist the call of music. "Sit down, Sister Margaret," Mother Superior said once they were behind closed doors. Her voice was calm, but Sister Margaret could hear the disappointment underneath. "I've been hearing some very disturbing reports about your recent behavior." Sister Margaret nodded miserably. "I can explain. Can you?" Mother Superior interrupted gently but firmly. "Because what I'm hearing is that you've been deliberately disobeying a direct instruction, sneaking around the convent at night, and deceiving your fellow sisters about your activities." "Is this true?" "Yes," Sister Margaret whispered. "It's all true." Mother Superior sighed deeply, suddenly looking much older than her 65 years. "Sister Margaret, I'm not just disappointed in your actions. I'm hurt that you felt you couldn't trust me with whatever was driving you to this behavior. We've known each other for decades. If you were struggling with something, why didn't you come to me?" "I tried to," Sister Margaret said, her voice gaining a little strength. "When I asked about the talent showcase, I was trying to find a way to honor this part of myself while still honoring my commitments here. But when you said no, I should have accepted that decision." "Yes, you should have," Mother Superior agreed. "Instead, you chose deception. You chose to put your own desires above the good of our community and the vows you made." The words hit Sister Margaret like physical blows, partly because they were true and partly because they weren't the whole truth. Yes, she had been deceptive. Yes, she had disobeyed. But calling her music simply a desire felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of what had been happening to her. "I understand your disappointment," Sister Margaret said carefully, "and I accept full responsibility for my actions. But I need you to understand that this wasn't about pride or selfishness. Music isn't just something I want to do, it's something I am. It's been sleeping inside me for 47 years, and when it woke up, I couldn't make it go back to sleep." Mother Superior's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Sister Margaret, I believe you when you say this means something important to you. But we all have parts of our former lives that call to us sometimes. The strength of our vocation is measured by our ability to resist those calls when they conflict with our commitments." "What if they don't have to conflict?" Sister Margaret asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What if there's a way for music to be part of my service rather than separate from it?" "There isn't," Mother Superior said definitively. "Not in the way you're thinking. Sister Margaret, effective immediately, you are forbidden from touching that piano. I'm having it locked, and Sister Catherine will hold the key. You will also spend an additional hour each day in prayer and reflection to help you refocus on your spiritual duties." Sister Margaret felt something break inside her chest. The finality in Mother Superior's voice left no room for argument or negotiation. "I understand," she said quietly. Furthermore, Mother Superior continued, the days following Sister Margaret's punishment felt like the longest of her entire 73 years. The piano in the community room now sat with a heavy brass lock securing its lid, a constant reminder of her disgrace. Every time she passed it during her daily duties, she felt a physical ache in her chest, as if someone had tied a rope around her heart and was slowly tightening it. The other sisters treated her differently now, too. Some avoided eye contact altogether, clearly uncomfortable with what they saw as her betrayal of their shared values. Others offered sympathetic glances but kept their distance, perhaps afraid that association with her might bring similar scrutiny. From Mother Superior? The easy camaraderie she had enjoyed for decades seemed to have evaporated overnight. Sister Margaret threw herself into her work with desperate intensity, trying to prove her renewed dedication to convent life. She arrived in the kitchen earlier than ever, scrubbed floors until they gleamed, and spent her required extra hour of prayer with genuine fervor. But even as she performed these acts of penance, the music continued to play in her head. taunting her with memories of those beautiful secret sessions, the only person who seemed unchanged in her treatment of Sister Margaret was Sister Agnes. If anything, the young nun appeared more attentive than before, often working alongside her in the kitchen or garden and engaging in gentle conversation. But it was during these conversations that Sister Margaret began to notice something curious. Sister Agnes kept bringing up topics related to music and calling. "I was thinking about our morning prayers today," Sister Agnes said one afternoon, as they weeded the vegetable garden together. "The way Sister Ruth's voice carries that alto harmony in Be Thou My Vision, it's so beautiful how each voice contributes something unique to make the whole song more powerful." Sister Margaret nodded absently, not sure where the conversation was heading. "It made me wonder," Sister Agnes continued, "about all the different ways people can serve God. I mean, we serve through cooking and cleaning and prayer, but surely musicians and artists and writers are serving too, aren't they? Using their gifts to bring beauty into the world?" These weren't casual observations, Sister Margaret realized. Sister Agnes was deliberately trying to get her to think about music and calling in a new way. But she didn't understand why until several days later, when Sister Agnes approached her with an unusual request. "Sister Margaret," she said quietly as they finished cleaning up after dinner, "could you teach me about music?" Sister Margaret looked up in surprise, a wet dish still in her hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean, could you explain to me how music works? I heard you playing that night, and it was so complex, so beautiful. I want to understand how someone creates." Something like that. Sister Margaret glanced around nervously, making sure no one else could hear their conversation. "Sister Agnes, I don't think that's a good idea. Mother Superior made it very clear that I'm not supposed to be involved with music anymore." "But you're not playing," Sister Agnes pointed out. "You'd just be explaining." "Surely there's nothing wrong with education?" Despite her reservations, Sister Margaret found herself drawn into the conversation. For weeks, she had been carrying all this musical knowledge and passion with nowhere to express it. Having someone genuinely interested in learning felt like finding water in a desert. "Well," she said hesitantly, "music is built on relationships between notes. When you hear a melody, what you're really hearing is a series of mathematical relationships that create emotional responses." For the next 20 minutes, as they finished the dishes, Sister Margaret found herself explaining concepts like harmony, rhythm, and musical structure. Sister Agnes listened with the intensity of someone studying for an important exam, asking thoughtful questions and making connections that showed she was truly understanding. "That's fascinating," Sister Agnes said when Sister Margaret finally stopped talking. "No wonder your playing was so moving. You weren't just pressing keys randomly, you were speaking a whole language that most of us don't understand." Sister Margaret felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot dishwater. For the first time since her punishment began, she felt valued for who she truly was rather than just tolerated despite her transgression. Over the following days, Sister Agnes continued to seek out these conversations. She would ask about different composers, about the emotions behind various pieces, about how Sister Margaret had learned to play so beautifully. Each conversation felt like a small rebellion, but also like a lifeline for Sister Margaret's drowning spirit. It was during one of these discussions, about a week after they had started, that Sister Agnes made a confession that changed everything. "Sister Margaret," she said, looking around to make sure they were alone in the garden, "I need to tell you something. That morning when I found you at the piano, I didn't just happen to wake up early." Sister Margaret paused in her weeding, sensing that something important was coming. "I had been hearing music for several nights," Sister Agnes continued. "Beautiful, haunting music drifting through the halls. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but it kept happening. So that morning I got up specifically to investigate. I wanted to know where such incredible music was coming from." Sister Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I thought I was being so careful with the volume." "You were," Sister Agnes assured her quickly. "Anyone else would have assumed it was their imagination or maybe music from outside. But I'm a light sleeper, and something about those melodies. was so compelling that I had to know their source. Sister Agnes paused, seeming to gather courage for what she wanted to say next. Sister Margaret, what I heard that night, and what you've explained to me about music since then, has made me think a lot about gifts and calling. I don't think God gives people talents just so they can bury them. But I chose to bury mine, Sister Margaret said quietly. When I entered this life, I made that choice willingly. Did you really choose to bury it? Sister Agnes challenged gently. Or did you choose to use it differently? Because listening to you play, hearing the reverence in your voice when you talk about music, that doesn't sound like someone who abandoned her gift. That sounds like someone who has been nurturing it privately all these years. Sister Margaret had never thought about it that way before. She had always seen her musical knowledge as a remnant from her former life, something to be minimized and ignored. But Sister Agnes was suggesting that it could be something else entirely, a continuing part of her spiritual journey rather than a distraction from it. I've been thinking, Sister Agnes said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, about the talent showcase at the community center. Sister Margaret's head snapped up in alarm. Sister Agnes, no. Mother Superior was very clear about that. Hear me out, Sister Agnes said urgently. What if there was a way for you to share your music without directly disobeying Mother Superior? What if someone else entered you in the showcase? That would still be going against her wishes, Sister Margaret protested, though she could feel her heart beginning to race at the possibility. Would it? Sister Agnes asked. She forbade you from pursuing music as a personal ambition. But what if this wasn't about personal ambition? What if it was about service to the community, about using your gift to help others? Sister Margaret stared at the young nun, amazed by both her boldness and her reasoning. What exactly are you suggesting? Sister Agnes took a deep breath. I'm suggesting that I call the community center and enter your name in the talent showcase. Not as Sister Margaret pursuing personal glory, but as a representative of St. Catherine's Convent, sharing music as a form of ministry. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Sister Margaret could imagine herself at that piano, finally able to share her music with an audience again. But she could also imagine Mother Superior's reaction if she found out. It's too risky, she said finally. If Mother Superior discovered what we had done, the consequences would be severe. For both of us. Maybe, Sister Agnes acknowledged. But Sister Margaret, I've been watching you since that night. You're withering away. The life is going out of you day by day. Whatever punishment Mother Superior intended, surely it wasn't meant to destroy your spirit entirely. Sister Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She hadn't realized how obvious her internal struggle had become. Besides, Sister Agnes continued, there's something else. Father Michael at St. Joseph's Church downtown has a beautiful grand piano. He's elderly and doesn't mind when community members use it for practice, especially if it's for a good cause. You could prepare there, away from the convent, away from all the complicated feelings here. The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning a dangerous chasm. Sister Margaret knew that crossing it would mean committing to a course of action that could change everything. But staying on this side meant accepting a future where her most essential self remained locked away forever. When is the deadline for entries? She heard herself asking, as if the words were coming from someone else. Sister Agnes smiled for the first time in their entire conversation. Next Friday. And the showcase itself is 2 weeks after that. Sister Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The 2 weeks between Sister Agnes registering Sister Margaret for the talent showcase and the actual performance passed in, a blur of secret preparation and mounting anxiety. Every afternoon while the other sisters were resting or engaged in personal prayer time, Sister Agnes would help Sister Margaret slip away from the convent under the pretense of visiting sick parishioners or running errands in town. Their destination was always St. Joseph's Church, a beautiful old building about 20 minutes away by walking. Father Michael, the elderly priest who ran the parish, had been delighted to learn about Sister Margaret's musical background and was more than happy to let her use the magnificent grand piano in his sanctuary for practice. The first time Sister. Margaret sat at that grand piano. She nearly wept. After weeks of being separated from music entirely, and months before that of playing on the old upright piano at the convent, the rich, full sound of a properly maintained concert instrument felt like coming home after a long journey. Her fingers seemed to come alive on the responsive keys, and melodies poured from her with an ease that surprised even her, but choosing what to perform proved more challenging than she had expected. Sister Margaret wanted something that would showcase her abilities while also honoring her faith and the charitable purpose of the event. She considered classical pieces she had loved in her youth, sacred hymns that had sustained her through decades of religious life, and even some contemporary spiritual songs she had heard on the radio. Finally, after days of experimentation and prayer, she settled on an arrangement that felt perfect for both her skills and her message. She would perform Amazing Grace, but not the simple version most people knew. Instead, she would play her own complex arrangement that began with the familiar melody, but gradually evolved into something that incorporated elements from classical composers like Bach and Chopin, weaving together the sacred and the sophisticated in a way that would demonstrate how music could be both worshipful and artistically ambitious. The practices at St. Joseph's became the highlight of Sister Margaret's days. For those precious hours each afternoon, she could be completely herself, not just the humble nun who cooked and cleaned and prayed, but also the musician who could make a piano sing with emotions too complex for words. Father Michael would often sit in the back pews while she practiced, nodding his appreciation and occasionally offering gentle suggestions about acoustics or interpretation. "You know," he told her after one particularly moving practice session, "I've been ministering to people for over 50 years, and I've learned that sometimes the most powerful sermons are the ones that don't use words at all. What you're doing with that music, that's preaching, Sister Margaret, that's ministry." His words gave her confidence that what she was doing was right, even as doubt continued to gnaw at her during the quiet moments between practices. Sister Agnes proved to be an invaluable ally throughout the preparation period. She not only helped facilitate Sister Margaret's escapes from the convent, but also served as a sounding board for her anxieties and fears. The young nun had a remarkable ability to listen without judgment and offer encouragement without minimizing the very real risks they were taking. "What if I forget the music in the middle of the performance?" Sister Margaret asked one evening as they walked back from St. Joseph's. "Then you'll remember it again," Sister Agnes replied calmly. "Music like yours doesn't just disappear. It's too much a part of who you are. What if people think I'm showing off? What if they see an old nun trying to relive her glory days instead of someone trying to serve God? Then they'll be wrong," Sister Agnes said firmly. "Anyone who hears you play will know immediately that what you're doing comes from a place of worship, not vanity." As the day of the performance approached, Sister Margaret's nervousness reached almost unbearable levels. She had barely slept for 3 nights, and her appetite had nearly disappeared entirely. The weight of what she was about to do, performing in public for the first time in 47 years, potentially defying Mother Superior's direct orders, risking everything she had built at the convent, felt almost crushing. The night before the showcase, Sister Agnes came to her room after evening prayers. "I have something for you," she said quietly. Pulling a small wrapped package from beneath her habit, Sister Margaret opened it carefully and found a delicate silver pin in the shape of a musical note, clearly handmade by someone with limited resources but unlimited love. "I made it in the craft room during free time," Sister Agnes explained. "I thought you might want to wear it tomorrow night, as a reminder that music and faith aren't opposites, they're partners." Sister Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes as she pinned the small symbol to the inside of her habit, where it would be hidden from view but close to her heart. The day of the performance dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sister Margaret's mood perfectly. She moved through her morning duties like a sleepwalker, barely speaking to anyone and jumping at every sound. Several times she considered backing out entirely, telling Sister Agnes that they should call the whole thing off. But then evening came, and it was time. Sister Agnes had arranged for them to leave the convent during dinner, when the confusion of meal service would help mask their absence. Sister Margaret felt like she was walking to her execution as they made their way through the early evening darkness toward the community center. The building was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Families were streaming in through the main entrance, children running ahead of their parents with excitement, elderly couples moving more slowly but with obvious anticipation for the evening's entertainment. Sister Margaret could hear laughter and conversation spilling out every time the doors opened, and the sound made her stomach clench with terror. "Maybe this was a mistake," she whispered to Sister Agnes as they approached the performer's entrance. "Maybe we should go back." "Sister Margaret," Sister Agnes said, stopping and turning to face her directly. "Look at me." Sister Margaret raised her eyes reluctantly. "You have spent 47 years serving God through humble, quiet work. Tonight you have the chance to serve Him through the gift He gave you before you ever set foot in a convent. Both kinds of service matter. Both kinds. Honor Him." Taking a deep breath, Sister Margaret nodded and followed Sister Agnes through the stage door. Backstage was a chaos of performers preparing for their acts. Children in dance costumes ran around while their mothers tried to apply makeup and fix hair. A man in a cowboy hat tuned his guitar in one corner, while a woman in a flowing dress practiced scales nearby. Sister Margaret felt completely out of place in her simple gray habit among all the colorful costumes and nervous energy when her name was called. Sister Margaret's legs almost refused to carry her to the stage. Sister Agnes gave her hand a quick squeeze and whispered, "Remember, this is worship. This is love made audible." The stage lights were brighter than Sister Margaret had expected, and for a moment she couldn't see the audience at all beyond the glare. She walked slowly to the beautiful baby grand piano that sat center stage, its polished surface reflecting the overhead lights like still water. As her eyes adjusted, she began to make out faces in the crowd. The community center was packed, easily 300 people filling every seat and lining the walls. She saw families with small children, teenagers who had clearly been dragged there by their parents, elderly couples holding hands, and people of all ages in between. Some looked curious, others polite but skeptical. A few seemed to be wondering what an elderly nun was doing on a talent showcase stage. Sister Margaret sat down at the piano bench and adjusted her position, her hands finding their familiar places above the keys. The audience fell silent, waiting to see what this unexpected performer would do. She closed her eyes for a moment and said a silent prayer, not for success or applause, but for the ability to share the love and worship that had been growing in her heart for weeks. When she opened her eyes and began to play, everything else disappeared. The opening notes of Amazing Grace were simple and familiar, exactly as most people in the audience expected to hear them. But as Sister Margaret continued, the arrangement began to evolve. Her left hand added bass lines that gave the melody new depth, while her right hand began weaving in harmonies that made the familiar tune seem both ancient and completely new. By the time she reached the second verse, the music had become something extraordinary. She was playing with the technical skill of a trained classical pianist, but with the emotional depth of someone who had lived every word of the hymn. The notes soared and whispered, thundered and caressed, taking the audience on a journey through hope and despair, loss and redemption, human frailty and divine grace. People who had been checking their phones or chatting quietly with neighbors found themselves drawn into the music against their will. Children stopped fidgeting. Teenagers looked up from their devices. Adults, who had come only to support their community, found themselves moved in ways they hadn't expected. As the arrangement reached its climax, Sister Margaret's playing became almost transcendent. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible grace, creating cascades of sound that seemed to fill not just the community center but the hearts of everyone listening. The walk back to St. Catherine's Convent after the performance felt like floating on air. Sister Margaret's heart was still racing from the adrenaline of performing, and her mind kept replaying the thunderous applause that had followed her music. She had forgotten how it felt to touch so many hearts at once. To watch a room full of strangers become united in a shared moment of beauty and wonder, Sister Agnes walked beside her in comfortable silence, both women understanding that they had just witnessed something special. The evening air was crisp and clean, and the stars seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was celebrating what had just occurred. But as they approached the familiar walls of the convent, reality began to set in. Sister Margaret's euphoria started mixing with anxiety about what would happen next. They had agreed that no one else at the convent would know about the performance, but keeping such a secret seemed almost impossible now. The experience had been too powerful, too life-changing to simply pretend it never happened. Unknown to Sister Margaret, someone in the audience that night had been recording performances on their phone to share with family members who couldn't attend. Her rendition of Amazing Grace had been captured in its entirety, and by the next morning, that person had posted it on social media with the caption, "You have to hear this incredible nun play piano. She brought the house down at our local talent show." The video began spreading immediately. People shared it with friends, who shared it with their friends, who shared it with their friends. Within 24 hours, thousands of people had watched Sister Margaret's performance. Within 48 hours, it was tens of thousands. By the end of the week, the number had reached into the hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from all over the world. "This brought me to tears. I've never heard Amazing Grace played so beautifully. This nun is incredibly talented. Music like this is a gift from God. She needs to make an album." The responses were overwhelmingly positive, with people praising not just Sister Margaret's technical skill, but the obvious spirituality and emotion she brought to her playing. Sister Margaret knew nothing about any of this technological miracle. She had returned to her normal routine at the convent, trying to act as if nothing had changed while privately treasuring the memory of that magical evening. She noticed that Sister Agnes seemed unusually excited about something, but assumed it was just the afterglow of their successful secret mission. It was Sister Catherine who first brought word of the outside world's reaction. "Sister Margaret," she said breathlessly as she hurried into the kitchen where Sister Margaret was preparing lunch. "Mother Superior wants to see you in her office immediately, and she doesn't look happy." Sister Margaret's blood ran cold. Had Mother Superior somehow found out about the performance? As she walked toward the office, her mind raced through possible explanations and excuses, though she knew that none of them would be sufficient if the truth had been discovered. Mother Superior was standing behind her desk when Sister Margaret entered, and her expression was indeed serious. But there was something else in her face too, confusion, perhaps, or maybe even curiosity. "Sister Margaret," Mother Superior began without preamble, "I've just received the most unusual phone call from the diocesan office. Apparently there's a video circulating on the internet of a nun performing piano music. The quality of the performance is remarkable, and it's attracting significant attention from around the world." Sister Margaret felt her legs go weak. The secret was out, and the consequences would be severe. "The strange thing," Mother Superior continued, studying Sister Margaret's face carefully, "is that this nun looks remarkably similar to you. In fact, several people have contacted the diocese specifically asking about St. Catherine's Convent and whether we have a Sister Margaret who plays piano." There was no point in denying it anymore. Sister Margaret straightened her shoulders and met Mother Superior's gaze directly. "Yes, Mother Superior. It was me." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Mother Superior sat down slowly, as if the weight of this revelation required her to steady herself. "Sister Margaret," she said finally, "you directly disobeyed my explicit instructions. You went behind my back, deceived your fellow sisters, and performed in public despite being specifically forbidden to do so." "Yes, Mother Superior, Sister," Margaret replied quietly. "I did. Why?" The question was asked not with anger, but with genuine confusion. "After 47 years of faithful service, after building a reputation as one of our most dedicated and obedient sisters, why would you risk everything for one performance?" Sister Margaret had been dreading this question, but now that it was asked, she found the answer came easily. "Because the music is part of who I am, Mother Superior. I tried to bury it, tried to pretend it didn't matter, but it does matter. It's part of how God made me, and I don't think He intended for me to waste that gift. But you agreed to leave that life behind when you entered our community, Mother Superior pointed out. I thought I had, Sister Margaret admitted. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's a difference between leaving behind the pursuit of personal glory and leaving behind the use of God-given talents entirely. Mother Superior was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with thoughts and emotions that Sister Margaret couldn't read. Finally, she spoke again. Sister Margaret, I need to tell you something. After I learned about this video, I watched it myself. She paused, and her voice became softer. What I saw was not a woman seeking attention or glory. What I saw was someone using an extraordinary gift to create something beautiful and holy. Your performance was moving, to say the least. Sister Margaret looked up in surprise. This was not the reaction she had expected. I've also been receiving phone calls all morning, Mother Superior continued. Churches asking if you would perform at special services. Charities requesting your participation in fundraising events. Media outlets wanting to interview you. The response to your performance has been remarkable. I never intended for any of that to happen, Sister Margaret said quickly. I just wanted to play once more to share the music I've been carrying inside me for so long. Mother Superior stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Sister Margaret had spent so many peaceful hours. Sister Margaret, I owe you an apology. When you first asked me about the talent showcase, I responded out of fear rather than wisdom. I was afraid of change, afraid of what it might mean for our community if one of our sisters stepped outside traditional boundaries. Sister Margaret could hardly believe what she was hearing. But watching your performance, seeing the joy and reverence in your face as you played, reading the comments from people who were touched by your music, I realize I may have been wrong. Perhaps there are more ways to serve God than I had previously considered. Mother Superior turned back to face Sister Margaret. I've been thinking about something Father Michael said when he called this morning. He told me that, in his opinion, your music is a form of ministry and that hiding such a gift serves no one. Father Michael called? Sister Margaret asked, surprised. He did. He wanted me to know that he had been allowing you to practice at his church and that he took full responsibility for encouraging what he saw as a beautiful expression of faith. Mother Superior's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. He also mentioned that he's never seen anyone play with such obvious devotion. Sister Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but they were tears of relief, rather than fear. Sister Margaret, Mother Superior said, returning to her seat, I'm not going to punish you for what you did. In fact, I'm going to do something that probably should have been done long ago. I'm giving you permission to pursue music as part of your ministry here. The words hit Sister Margaret like a physical force. After months of secrecy and guilt, after years of buried dreams, she was being given official permission to be fully herself within the community she loved. Furthermore, Mother Superior continued, if you're willing, I'd like you to consider accepting some of these performance requests. Not for personal gain, but as a way of extending our convent's mission into the wider world. The donations being offered could support our charitable work significantly. Over the following weeks, Sister Margaret's life transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. The video of her performance continued to spread, eventually reaching millions of viewers worldwide. Letters arrived daily from people sharing how her music had touched their lives, helped them through difficult times, or renewed their faith in the power of beauty and art. She began performing regularly at churches and charity events throughout the region. Each performance drew larger crowds, and the donations raised helped fund not only the convent's work but also various community projects and charitable causes. Sister Margaret insisted that all the money go directly to helping others, refusing any personal compensation beyond her basic needs. The piano in the convent's community room was unlocked and moved to a place of honor in the main hall. Sister Margaret now played daily for her fellow sisters, filling their meals and gatherings with beautiful music.